I'm joined now by Ginella, Massa, the host of Canada Tonight, for our special coverage of the Vigil this hour. And Ginella, as we await the beginning of this Vigil, I know that you have spent yesterday evening, yesterday afternoon, as it became apparent that this was a targeted murder, one perpetuated by an individual, police say, motivated by hate, motivated essentially to target someone of the Muslim faith, and found his target in a family, killing 4 of them. You have spent quite some time speaking to people from the community in London, and more broadly than that. And I wonder if you could share where people are at.
Yeah, David, it's been an incredibly difficult few days covering this story, and for the Muslim community to hear this so emphatically from London police yesterday, that this was a premeditated, targeted hate crime. That's not something we usually hear from police when it comes to incidents involving the Muslim community. You know, in the past, police often been reluctant to use that language, or, you know, a bit more hesitant to say whether or not they're considering a hate crime. So to hear them so clearly and specifically call it that, just 24 hours after this fatal hit and run, and that's how this story started on Sunday night, was a hit and run that had killed a family in London. To hear them call it that so specifically and so quickly in the following hours was really earth-shattering to the Muslim community. You know, yesterday the news broke that police presser around 3 in the afternoon. I was actually filling in on the afternoon shift. I typically I'm not here during that time, and ended up taking some of that coverage live for that hour and speaking with people who were just coming to terms with the news, just wrapping their heads around it, and the shock and the sadness around the fact that this was a family who was out doing a mundane activity, out for a walk, as so many of us during the pandemic have done. And for myself, you know, I immediately thought about my family. I did exactly the same thing this weekend. I went for a walk with my family after dinner, and I'm visibly Muslim. I didn't think at all that, you know, I could be in danger or that I should be worried about my safety. And so hearing that, you know, a family with a young child, a 9-year-old boy, a 15-year-old girl, a grandmother, the parents, just mowed down. It was incredibly difficult. And you know, hearing about that 9-year-old boy who is now left without his family, that was the part that I think for anyone, any parent, anyone with a heart, it's just heartbreaking to know that he has lost his entire family. So community certainly in grief. There's a lot of anger. There are a lot of questions. I know we hear a lot about you know, people saying, how did we get here? How did this happen? This isn't my Canada. But you know, as someone who, you know, wears a religious symbol, I've certainly felt hate. I've felt the impacts of, you know, those kinds of sentiments. So in some ways, we're not surprised, but of course we are horrified that it would come to this.
Yeah, I am struck, of course, by the word mundane that you used, Ginella. It was a family out for a walk on a hot Sunday night in the summer. On the far right, Salman Afzal, 46 years old, and second from the left, his wife, Madiha Salman, 44. They came to this country 14 years ago with a newborn daughter, Yumna Afzal. You see her there on the far left, in grade 9. And the grandmother, Yumna's grandmother, beside her son, there second from the right. All 4 of them were killed when that pickup truck, in a targeted fashion, according to police, jumped the sidewalk and struck them. The only survivor, 9-year-old boy, now left without his family. Going to bring Ginella, Massa back in to this conversation. Ginella, as we await you know, the few minutes that remain until the start of the vigil, I continue to think that we've seen this before. You know, we've seen it. We talk about the Quebec City mosque attack, in which the weapon of choice was a gun instead of a truck. But these are not isolated. You talk about incidents that have happened to you. I just look at your social media feeds and see some of the garbage that gets thrown your way. I think about Muslim women who have had their hijabs pulled off of them, their hair pulled, even if they're not wearing a hijab, people who are punched. I think about a man in Saskatoon just a few years ago who just simply got out of the way in time before a car seemingly in a targeted fashion struck him. And I wonder where, as a member of this community, where your thoughts are about fear in a moment like this.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a sense of deja vu. We were here, what is that, 4 years ago now, after the Quebec mosque shooting. The sadness, the thoughts and prayers, the outrage. And what's difficult is how quickly, you know, that story kind of fell off the radar. And in the aftermath, you know, you spoke earlier with Ikra Khalid, who is the MP who brought forward that motion, M103, to condemn Islamophobia. It was a non-binding motion. It didn't actually require the federal government to do anything. And yet 91 MPs voted against it. And so, you know, it's difficult to think that after 6 men were gunned down in cold blood in a place of worship, and it didn't move this country or politicians to even just make a statement or take a stand in a way that said that Islamophobia is real and we won't allow it to happen in this country. So it's difficult to then hear politicians, you know, give their statements today. I heard you guys running clips from the leaders. It's difficult to hear someone like Aaron O'Toole say that Islamophobia has no place in this country when he voted against M103. And I might get in trouble for, you know, speaking about politics, but, you know, I can't remove my identity. There's people, as you say, who think I shouldn't have this job because of the way that I've chosen to dress. And there are people in this country who can't have the job that they want to have as a teacher or as a police officer or as a judge if they choose to dress this way, because our legislation in certain provinces don't allow them to. So yeah, it's difficult to have conversations about how sad we are or, you know, how we've gotten here when we have legislation and politicians who have put forward legislation that allows, you know, governments to say, you're not welcome here. People who look like you are not welcome here. You have to assimilate. You have to look a certain way. I heard your guest on Power and Politics on the Power panel talking about the idea, you know, even if we assimilate as much as we can, I can't change my skin color, right? And so there's this idea that you can be as much as you want the model minority, but to some extent, you know, there's only so much you can conform to this, you know, neutral or secular sort of environment, because you will always be an other. You will always be seen as an other. So I think that's why it's difficult, you know, to look at what's happened here and to think, how is this different than what happened 4 years ago when, you know, nothing changed?
Stark words, perhaps necessary words as well, Ginella.
So let's bring in Ginella Massa and David Common now. I know you have both been watching the vigil along with us. Ginella, I'd really like to start with you and what struck you.
Yeah, I'm still kind of collecting my thoughts after that more than 2-hour event. Honestly, I'm a little emotional as the event wrapped up there, hearing the adhan, the Muslim call to prayer, on national TV, because often it's a sound that it's comforting to the Muslim community, but it's often used to vilify us. We hear it in movies where terrorists are about to do bad things, and it's really taken out of context a lot of times. And so to hear that, that call to prayer, it's something that we as Muslims hear every day, you know, before our prayers, and it's something that's a comfort to us. So getting a chance to kind of share our faith, even in a difficult moment, is a blessing. You know, I talked to David earlier about some of the things that have been difficult in the aftermath of this. And one of the things that struck me was that there were a lot of politicians at this event. I would have loved to hear from more community members. There were a lot of politicians here offering their condolences, their thoughts and prayers, and making statements, saying all the right things about Islamophobia, that it has no place in our country. But many of them have the opportunity to take action and haven't. I mentioned to David about the MPs that have voted against motion against Islamophobia, condemning Islamophobia, in the months after a shooting that saw 6 men gunned down in cold blood in a place of worship. The Prime Minister has also said, while he disagrees with Bill 21, the religious symbols ban in Quebec, he will not take the step to repeal it. He believes that that province should make its own decisions. So there are politicians who have the opportunity to actually take steps to do some of the things that Muslims are calling for in terms of what is feeding Islamophobia and hate. So, you know, I hope that some of those words will actually turn into action, and I'm sure the Muslim community is feeling that tonight as well.
Ginella, my one last thought to you is what everyone saw here tonight, does that offer comfort, do you think? Do you think that will go a long way?
You know, I think why it's difficult to be optimistic is that these are the acts that are easy to condemn. These are the acts that are easy to point at and say, this is wrong, this is horrible, this shouldn't happen. And it's what makes us sit up and pay attention. But Muslims every day deal with Islamophobia in many different ways. That, as David pointed out, doesn't end up being fatal. They deal with discrimination, they deal with hate. Children deal with it as well. And so, as I said, you know, as I said to David, 4 years ago, we saw this happen with the Quebec mosque. Last year, we saw this happen outside of Toronto Mosque, a man stabbed to death, and many other incidents that we've named. And those incidents didn't shake this country enough to really take a real look at itself. So will this be any different? It's hard to feel optimistic.
All right, Ginella and David, thank you. As you can hear, this is one last prayer that people have been asked to join in. So we will leave it here with you. Thank you for your coverage today and for your insights.